Welcome back to another It's funny. So welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, and this week's show is basically a tune-up show. We've been off 2 weeks for the holidays. I was out of commission this weekend with sickness, which is why the box scores of the week are not up this week, but we're going to talk them on this show, and don't worry, they're still coming this week. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
Happy 2019, Dre. And yeah, it's good to be back doing our first show of the year. And boy, there's a lot going on in the NBA. And glad you are over your sickness as well.
Thank you. I mean, obviously with travel and all that, and I think it's been around, but should be good. All right. So what I've decided for this week's show, actually, Brian, let's do the last week on Lost, and then we're going to talk subjects. We've just got a plethora of stuff to talk about. The only one I'll throw out there is we are going to bash the Houston Rockets for signing Austin Rivers. That is coming. But a reminder about how the show format normally works. We do last week on Lost. We review any comments or corrections, omissions, anything like that. We have a group of quick topics that Brian and I go over, and then we have some of our meatier topics. This week we don't really have any meaty topics, so we just have a ton of odds and ends, loose topics, things like the Houston Rockets, SRS, Tony Dungy, a bunch. We'll get to them about the NBA. Last week on Lost, I'm actually just going to use as an excuse to talk, some of you lucky people that have not gotten to see the box scores of the week because it's late this week. Jay Brett, Benji Bopper, and Iceman234 all commented on last week's version of it, so I figured I'd run down some of the scores that made it this week, Brian. Reminder, I do the top 5. These are subjective, but I always include the best box score of the week by the points over par metric. A reminder how that works is it's basically estimating the point margin your team would outscore an average team by with that player's performance. So that always makes it, and usually is top of the list, and then just some other games that are usually pretty good or impressive. This week, Brian, in order, my top 5 are Yusuf Nurkic put up a 5x5, which we actually did discover earlier this year, Brian, because I left the 5x5, I believe, off the list, and then we looked it up, and holy cow, 5x5s, I believe, are super rare. Obviously not as rare as quadruple doubles, but I think about the next rare thing on the list of kind of commonly used axioms for types of box scores. So Yusuf Nurkic put up a 5x5 in a 20x20 game. It was overtime, to be fair, but still very impressive and was the best box score of the week, plus 19.1 points over par. The number 2 one that made it was actually Giannis against the New York Knicks, just absolutely decimated them in a mere 19.4 minutes of play and actually put up, I think, the 3rd best game of the week. So he made it, almost had a triple-double in that. 2nd best box score of the week. Nikola Jokic put up it's Nikola. So sorry, we've been talking about trying to make sure we get name pronunciations correct, and I'm sure I'm messing up Nurkic's name. I think it's K, not Ch, but I'll look that up in a second. But Nikola Jokic put up a triple-double with 15 assists, which was absolutely remarkable. And then also DeMar DeRozan put up a triple-double when he absolutely smacked down his former team and the best team out east, or 2nd best. I think the Milwaukee Bucks still have it.
That was a brutal game, by the way, Dre. They were up by like 20 points in the first quarter, I want to say. It was like 33-11, but yeah, that game was brutal.
It was amazing. And yeah, I mean, what was the narrative going into that game was, oh man, is Kawhi going to have a revenge game and absolutely light up the Spurs? And the opposite happened. DeMar DeRozan came out and just beat the tar out of the Raptors. I might have some thoughts on that. I don't think we put them on the show notes. There's another player that was saying something about being surprised being traded, and I know that shocks me.
Yeah, we've talked about that, yeah.
And the very last one, James Harden, he actually did make the list as kind of an honorable mention. It was not for impressiveness. It was not for production, even though it was an above average game. It was for impressiveness. He took 23 3-point shots and made 10 of them in a game, and he has just been going all out from 3. What's been a little remarkable about his performance as of late is they're good, but not what I would consider kind of MVP-ish. As I noted, the top box scores of the week tend to be above plus 10 points over par. And the all-star players, the MVP caliber players, you can go to the box score Geeks and look at the top ones, tend to be close to that. Right now, who we would vote to the MVP, our number 1 slot would go to Rudy Gobert. and he currently is a plus 9.5 points over par player. So what's been happening on James Harden's quote-unquote hot run lately is he's been playing good, but not close to that level. So I think there's other stuff going on with the Rockets. Capella, we feel, is always an underrated player. Losing Carmelo Anthony is huge. So, it's interesting to me because I know he's been getting a lot of mainstream attention. Is he an MVP player again? I mean, he's always an MVP player, but I don't think he's been playing as good as people think, despite the fact that he is actually shooting quite well. And by the way, it is Yusuf Nurkic, so it is a Kitch. So apologies for that, Yusuf. But best score of 2019 so far, and we'll see if that holds up. All right. And then also, I'll actually admit this, Brian, I'm still a little behind on this list. The only bad box score of the week I have so far is Dirk Nowitzki. 0 for 10 shooting performance, by far the worst box score of the week last week, I think, and it was in very little time. So that's the impressive part.
Yeah, I think he plays about 8 minutes a game, right? So getting 10 shots up is impressive.
Did it in like 10 minutes and was negative 15 points over par. I'm going to be really mad at Nurkic and Nowitzki this week, both for being names that I mess up routinely. And also, normally with these lists, I have a few tricks. I look for triple doubles or 5x5s or 20/20s or whatever. And when one player, so in this case, Nurkic just took all of them. He got a 20/20, he got a 5x5, he got, the most points over par. It's like when one takes all of them, then I'm stuck with usually a couple of clumped ones and it's hard to decide. So that is a little amusing, but we'll see. That'll be out in a bit. And thank you very much to the people. Jay Brett, obviously, like I said, Iceman also did. Let me get the last name. I know I already said them once, but let's just get it again. And Benji Bopper. To the people that routinely comment, it's one of my favorite things to do, and I know I don't get as many normal pieces out, but thanks for the engagement because, I have fun with it.
Yeah, Iceman mentions Paul George as well. He's looking pretty good with Oklahoma City. Yeah,
last week he put up one, and let's throw that out again. Just let's hammer this point home again, Brian. He is playing better than this season so far.
He's having a career year, I think.
He's playing better than Kevin Durant, and he's playing what we'd expect. What's key about Paul George this season is if you look at him early in his career with Indiana, if you look at the normal age curve, this is what we kind of expected him to be at his peak. But what happened, of course, is he got a major injury in the Olympics. And we said, well, players coming back from injury, we don't know what's going to happen. And he never looked like he was quite 100%. And then we also believe that some teams, like the Indiana Pacers, were playing him out of position. So the fact that he's getting played in position and seems to be healthy and is in a position he's happy with looks great. It does make me sad, if he had gone to Los Angeles, that team would be a contender this season. So it is a little sad. And we'll see what happens with LeBron James. I believe they are 1-6 since he has gone down with his groin injury. So obviously LeBron James matters a lot. And we'll see, because you and I have had contrasting theories on LeBron James. My theory has been he's just going to the wheels are one day the wheels are just going to fall off and he's done. And you said maybe he declines more gracefully. And the fact of the matter is LeBron James was a legitimate MVP player. He would have gotten our MVP vote if we only had one. Last season would have gotten our first place MVP vote if we had the full five last season. And we went, what the hell? Because I've brought up this point many, many times. Essentially, at this point in their respective careers, if we're comparing LeBron James to, say, Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, two players he's routinely compared with, they're done. At this point in those players' careers, either in minutes played in like Michael Jordan's careers or in age as in Kobe's. And the reason I like Kobe a lot as a comparable is Kobe and LeBron James were both high schoolers. So, comparing LeBron James to players like Kareem or Michael gets a little harder because those players in college had much lighter schedules. LeBron James was playing 80 games a season from the get-go at age 19, whereas those others weren't. Kobe Bryant was done at this point. And Kobe Bryant, one of our caveats we give him, we think he's overrated despite agreeing that he's a first ballot Hall of Fame player. One of our caveats is he had amazing longevity, and that's one of the things you have to give him when you're considering him in the annals of greatest all time. He was done at this point. So I don't know what's going to happen with LeBron James. He wasn't one of our topics, but I'll say he's unofficially our first one, Brian. We're going to see what happens because if he comes back healthy, that's obviously key for their success. But I don't know at this point.
Yeah, and so that's a fair point. If he does start racking up injuries, then who knows? Like, that happened to Steve Nash, right? Steve Nash was playing really well, even into his late 30s, and then all of a sudden he just couldn't play anymore due to injuries. He was just finished, right? So sure, that could happen to LeBron, but I would say the reason I'm optimistic about him is as he ages, his productivity just has so far to fall. It's almost like the opposite of Patrick's ladder of success for team building theory. In that when you're all the way at the bottom, it's just impossible to climb all the way up so quickly, like these lottery teams are saying, by tanking. With LeBron, it's like, okay, maybe he can't jump quite as high, react quite as quickly, but his numbers just have such a long way to fall before he's back down to even average. So if he wants to, it seems like he does. It seems like he still wants to compete. I think he could be really good for 3 to 5 more years.
Well, I keep throwing this out there, and I'm going to keep doing it. My theory is that he is done being worried about titles, and I can't fault that because, one,
I like this theory.
His defeat of the Golden State Warriors, he's done, in my opinion, on having to prove himself. I don't believe he has a legitimate chance at 3 more finals MVPs, which would be what is required for people with the stupid rings argument to Michael Jordan. And I'm not even saying he doesn't have a shot at another 3 titles, but as an example, if he'd gone to Philadelphia, I thought Philadelphia, if he was looking for 2 or 3 more rings, if he was looking for 6 rings like MJ, Philadelphia was the best place for him. Now, I'm not saying he should have gone there, but that was just my theory. The thing is, in Philadelphia, obviously both Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are huge candidates to put up a finals MVP performance. We saw that in Golden State with Steph Curry. Steph Curry has not won a finals MVP yet because he's playing next to players that have upside like Andre Iguodala. Andre Iguodala and Klay Thompson, at least Klay Thompson maybe a year or two ago, are both players that very legitimately could have put up a finals MVP performance, right? It wouldn't have been shocking. Klay Thompson has like 3 games where he scores 10 plus threes a game and averages 40 for the finals and wins finals MVP. That could still happen this season. I wouldn't be shocked. So winning a finals MVP is hard, especially when you're on a team with other players that have it in them to get that. And that is the case with the Warriors, right? I think there are 4 players on that team, possibly, we'll see about Andre Iguodala's health and stuff, every year. And this year, even with DeMarcus Cousins, right? If DeMarcus Cousins is 80% plus, he's another candidate. So there's no guarantee of a finals MVP. LeBron James can probably astutely go, look, I can't get 6 finals MVPs. That's really outside the shot of what's likely. Even just making a finals is a really hard thing to do. I've already made he made it to 8 straight finals, 9 straight finals, 3 finals MVPs, biggest upset in NBA finals history. And then as I was tweeting about this week, it happened earlier in the game than I remembered, Brian. It's just how narratives work in your brain. LeBron James blocked a breakaway slam dunk or layup, actually blocked a breakaway layup by Andre Iguodala, the reigning finals MVP, to keep the Cleveland Cavaliers in the game and eventually win. But it happened a minute and 30 to go. So it actually wasn't the key play, but it feels like the key play, right? In my mind, I remember it being with like 10 seconds to go. It happened to the minute and 30. There's nothing else LeBron James can legitimately do. If you don't already give him the credit for his postseason success, there's not really anything else he can realistically do in the next 4 to 5 years. But he can score enough to surpass Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he can do it on the biggest stage, which is Los Angeles, and he can do it in the forum where people will appreciate him the most for it, because he's going to pass Kobe Bryant, Karl Malone, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to do it, and 3 of those players were Lakers. So that's been my pet theory, and as long as he's got that drive and determination, I think he'll keep at it.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory, which I like. I can see if he kind of flounders for a couple of seasons, they can't bring in good talent around him. Maybe he'll just start jacking up shots like Kobe, but I think he'll give it at least a few more years. And I still love the theory that he wants to hang on at least 4 more years to play with his son, potentially. That would be really cool. But
that theory as well. Yeah, that's a good one.
I'd love to see that happen.
All right, let's give you, this has been a Brian test. You have a lot of good tests, Brian, that I really like. So the one you've been kind of doing in the NBA this season is you've been examining the SRS and more importantly, kind of the SRS distribution of the league, which is actually a test I really like. Looking at the distribution of the league is very important for a lot of things, and other tests I'd like to do in the future. And the reason it's important is, at the beginning of the year when everybody in week 1 or 2 is freaking out, you noted, I think it was like plus or minus 30 in terms of SRS. Reminder, SRS is strength of schedule adjusted point margin. In an average NBA season, the point margin tends to be plus or minus 10, and that's the upper bounds. There's some crazy seasons where we see plus or minus 10. In some seasons, like for instance, back in the day when the New Jersey Nets made the finals, it'd be like plus or minus 6. But we finally kind of normalized where the Milwaukee Bucks, still the best team in the NBA, plus 8.7 SRS, and the worst team in the NBA, Cleveland Cavaliers, negative 10.4. So you were kind of saying the SRS in the NBA, and more importantly, the distribution of the SRS is normalized and teams are starting to look more normal. And then what's even weirder compared to some other seasons is just how clumped everything is. Obviously, the bottom of the East is still a dumpster fire, but I would say the top 5 teams out East, right? From Toronto down to Toronto down to Boston is actually pretty decent, right? 1.38 for the 76ers, up to 8.7 for the Bucks. And then out west, it is just super duper clumped. The Nuggets are top only at plus 5.5, and then there are a bunch of teams in it. And, down to the 11th seed, the Minnesota Timberwolves, there are still some good teams there.
Yeah, and even the Pelicans, who are 18-22, one of the bottom teams in the West, are 13th in SRS, the top half of the league. So, yeah, there's a lot of teams around 500. It's very well clumped. We don't have, like we did the last few seasons, where there's a dominant, Houston or Golden State up there at the top. Bucks could be that team still. They were earlier in the season, but right now, they've fallen back a little bit. And to be fair, their Pythagorean record is 29-9 as of today, January 7th, which is better than their actual record with 11 losses. So they've had a little bad luck, but yeah, we'll have to see what happens. But whenever I watch an NBA game, which is, to be fair, at least half of them are Warriors games. I watch all those games, and I watch other games other nights. I'm just like, geez, all these teams are really good and evenly matched. And I just felt like we haven't seen that the last few years. So I don't know if this means anything really. For one thing, from wages of wins, parity is not good for the league. So in terms of ratings, right? So the league probably would want some of these teams to pick things up by the end of the season. But yeah, that's how I see things right now anyway, earlier in January.
Let's clarify a lot of stuff. The wages of wins doesn't say parity isn't good for the league. What the wages of wins says is the myth that no parity is bad for the league is false, in large part in the NBA, because we've never seen parity. I think parity isn't bad for the league if the league wasn't as stupid as it is. And my team is a perfect example. The Milwaukee Bucks, according to the advanced stats, are the best team in the NBA. They have no business being in Milwaukee. Honestly, Chicago could handle the Milwaukee Bucks better than Milwaukee, and make more money. When you look at like Apple, right? There is not an Apple store in every random rinky-dink town in the country. There are some cities where it's just not worth it to have an Apple store here. There's not enough commerce. There's not enough people. Whereas the NBA, what it really is it's cheapskate billionaires saying, where can I get a tax break, instead of more nuanced billionaires saying, where is the most advantageous. Now, to be fair, one of the reasons this occurs is the NBA does have a lot of profit sharing, and the NBA, the best way to make money as an NBA owner is honestly to hold on to your team and flip it, because it's a super duper rare commodity. There were early NBA days, right? There were 8 teams. As of the 70s, I believe there were 23 when there was the merger with the ABA. It got up to 28, and then with expansion has gotten up to 30. That is very small growth. So the smartest way to make money as an NBA owner is to buy a team, hold on to it, and eventually wait till an owner like Steve Ballmer really, really wants a team and sell it for a lot of money. And we've noted that things like legalized sports gambling are just upping the value. So if you're an NBA owner, there is not really an incentive to run the NBA as a smart business, because if you're going to invest the time in running a smart business, there are better businesses than professional sports to make money at doing that. So the NBA, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to have some of the teams where they are. if the top teams in the NBA via SRS were the New York Knicks, the Los Angeles Clippers, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Brooklyn Nets, and the Chicago Bulls, that's great because that's their big markets, and there are lots of people there that would be invested in seeing them. The reason parity traditionally in the NBA hasn't been great is when there's more parity, it means these small market teams with fewer people with less money are getting good product, whereas people in big markets aren't getting as good of a product. So parity could be good for the NBA, but the way parity tends to shake out, and like we're saying, the Milwaukee Bucks and Denver Nuggets, I'll give a shout out to Devin Dignam and Arturo Galletti, who back in the day for the Wages of Wins wrote one of my favorite kind of series of pieces that definitely needs an update, which was which city should not have a professional sports team, particularly an NBA team. And two of the top five, Devin wrote this article that had top five, Milwaukee and Denver shouldn't have an NBA team. And the reasons were Denver is a good sports market, but they are saturated. They have a baseball team, a football team, a hockey team, and a basketball team. They are a big enough market to justify a couple major league teams, but not four. And really, the Nuggets are kind of the odd one out because there's a bigger demand for baseball and football in that market. And then, of course, at least back in the day, the Avalanche were a fantastic squad. So if there was going to be an odd team out, the Denver Nuggets made sense. The Milwaukee Bucks are just too small of they shouldn't have. They have a baseball team and a basketball team, and they shouldn't have either. They're way too small of a market to justify either. So that's currently what's bad. The last note I'll make on parity, and has been really bizarre about the season, is none of the teams, I think I tweeted this out a little while ago, Brian, none of the top teams currently are fully healthy. The Denver Nuggets, Paul Millsap's been out injured. Gary Harris was out injured. Will Barton is still out injured. Oklahoma City Thunder, Andre Robertson is still out injured. The Golden State Warriors obviously have yet to see DeMarcus Cousins suit up. We've seen some injuries to some players such as Steph Curry.
And Draymond Green, he's playing again, but he looks bad this season.
Yeah, I think out east, obviously, Kawhi still isn't 100%. Lowry has been out for a bit.
Celtics have had some injuries.
The 76ers have had some trades with Jimmy Butler and all that, and I think in some injuries as well. So I would say more for the parity right now is normally the reason there's less parity in the NBA is at least one or two teams stays reasonably healthy, if not 100% healthy, and a lot of the top teams have been dealing with injuries. So I think if these teams heal up, and especially like post All-Star break, because there's not enough space in the All-Star game for all of the great players we're seeing this season, I think post All-Star we could see some teams just pull away, including your Warriors, and that's nothing new. The same thing happened last year. They had a bunch of injuries. They made it to the playoffs. They were healthy in the playoffs, and they basically stomped everybody except the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, and a lot's being made right now about their offense and their rotations and all that. We have a Steve Kerr segment coming up, but yeah, what you're saying is probably right. Some of these teams will pull up. And just one more thing on the parity, the playoff and finals TV ratings are always the highest when there's these super dominant teams, right? When the Warriors and Cavs the last few years have had really good TV ratings, the best since we had those really dominant Bulls teams, I want to say. And then, of course, like the Lakers three-peat was great finals TV ratings as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think what's key in that regard is when you get casual people who have no idea invested.
Exactly.
And Dave Barry has been talking a lot about this, in particular with how we need to build women's sports, which is the way sports are popular and draw people is that they have a base of reference to come from. It's one reason why professional wrestling keeps dragging up wrestlers that haven't been relevant, at least in terms of health and stuff, in years. It's because they know people remember who they are. And so it helped when the NBA Finals is two new teams and everybody's like, that's fantastic. That's great for the league. You go, well, maybe, but what's more important is that people go, hey, it's the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Warriors again. And I know the Warriors won last year. Is Cleveland going to come back and win this year? So, and like, I compare this to boxing a lot. In boxing, people recognize this, right? The rubber matches, the comebacks. It's actually one of my random critiques of the Rocky franchises, that the Rocky franchises seem to forget that rematches are a thing after Rocky 2. Clubber Lang seems to disappear in the Rocky universe. Ivan Drago, he's just done after that big fight. He claims he's...
Wait, isn't he the coach in Creed 2, though?
He's the coaching
like 30 years later.
The backstory is he basically got cast out of the USSR and has been living in poverty. And I'm like, bullshit. After the Iron Curtain falls, there's going to be some person in the USA who's going to want to, who would be willing to hire him, because he's still in his prime. He was still super young and in his prime. So it is just a weird thing that people don't recognize that familiarity in sports is a good thing, and so dominant teams can be a good thing. Speaking of a dominant team that seems to have fallen but maybe back in favor, the Houston Rockets, on the back of maybe James Harden and some other players, are fighting back, but something happened over Christmas break, and I said, if we have nothing else to talk about on the show, Brian, we can just say Austin Rivers and laugh for an hour. Houston Rockets picked up Austin Rivers, and we don't get it. Now, funny thing, he's having a career year so far in Houston, but he's still a below-average player, and this really does make us question some things. I have no idea why you would pick up Austin Rivers, and then he's starting to be up there. Another funny player that I guess is out injured right now, which is actually probably helping them, is Eric Gordon. The Houston Rockets have baffled us because they have done a fantastic job at the key thing to win in the NBA, which is acquiring stars. Picking up James Harden, picking up Dwight Howard back in the day, picking up Chris Paul. These are all amazing moves that are required to contend, but they've underperformed in our opinion, and a huge reason is they pick up subpar players. And this season for Daryl Morey, in our opinion, has just been a disaster. Carmelo Anthony, Michael Carter-Williams, and now Austin Rivers. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, and I love the way you frame that, and I'll just kind of say it a different way to agree with you, which is, yeah, getting stars is the hardest part, and to achieve what Morey has with those 3 stars is incredible, right? Almost any other team in the league outside of maybe the Warriors would, trade their top 3 players for these 3 guys. Maybe even the Warriors, I don't know. And so then the easy part is you just need to get, above average or average players to fill out the rest of those roles on the roster. And there are guys like that, right? The G League is around now. There's a lot of good players that come up from the G League. It can be done. And for whatever reason, they just have some of the worst players in the league on this roster. And I should always, put the caveat out there, since, our first show of 2019, no players in the NBA are bad. They're all really, really good. It's just by math, right? Some players have to be better than others. You have to rank them from top to bottom, and the worst players in the league happen to be on the Rockets right now. So, yeah, Austin Rivers, really disappointing. Eric Gordon, even PJ Tucker is kind of showing his age, and he has the most minutes on the team this year. So, with Chris Paul hurt, despite the fact they're 8-2 over their last 10, their margin of victory / SRS is still kind of mediocre. So I'm not very confident in the Rockets. If they can squeak into the playoffs, get Chris Paul healthy, they could shoot a lot of threes and win some games on the road, right? They just beat the Warriors in overtime in a ridiculous game. And, okay, do you want me to just bring up my tweet right now, Dre?
Even with the Warriors cheating, you still couldn't win.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah, this... Okay, I won't bring up the stats because it'll take too long, but let me just say it again. So basically, the Rockets in that game against the Warriors were outshot 102-109, and they also lost in field goal percentage by quite a bit. I want to say it was between 5 to 7 points, which is substantial in an NBA game, right? However, they still won the game by just taking many, many more threes. It was like 54-37, something like that. Again, this is off my memory. And then in addition to that, they had a ton of free throw attempts. The Warriors had much less, right? If you look at the shot chart, that tells the whole story, right? So they can still win games and get by with that strategy. And in the playoffs, they could take a ton of threes and knock someone off, but their roster is pretty bad right now.
Well, the key about success in the NBA and the luck is if your top 3 is reasonable, you can sometimes survive potholes. We were noticing that about even the Warriors, where players like Nick Young weren't enough to crash them because they were just too good. Clint Capella and James Harden are good enough players, and Chris Paul, if he gets back. And I think what happened at the start of the season, we even noticed this, is like Carmelo Anthony was that damn bad I'm actually going to give it to the Rockets. I was looking over their streak, right, since they've started winning. They've beaten some good teams: Memphis Grizzlies, San Antonio Spurs, Oklahoma City Thunder, Golden State Warriors. They did just get beaten down by the Portland Trailblazers.
Is that an enemy in Super Mario Brothers, Dre?
Swamp, I believe.
Oh, okay. There's a W. Okay.
And then let's take a look. They were beating the Denver Nuggets. They are up by 10 in the third, so it's anybody's game. I really hope Denver comes back. So we'll have to see. They're playing good, and that's what makes this rough. Is that what we're saying is this is without Melo, right? Melo was just a flat out mistake. Without Melo, this is like a 50+ win team. We think they could have easily been a 60+ win team, and just these small things are really weird. A person I've mentioned before that I will just give a shout out to is Kevin Draper. I forget the specifics of the piece, but he did write a piece about Daryl Morey and how it's hard to judge GMs because you don't really know all of the moving pieces that allow them to make decisions. I got a lot of directions I can go, but I'm going to go to James Harden's free throw right in a second. But I was going to say, he just noted that, right? Like, it might be that the owner doesn't let you make the move you want to make. An example I'll make, I'm going to try and get this player's name, so I'm going to type in the background, so apologies. But Red Auerbach.
While you're typing, Dre, I'll just say one thing. Like Carmelo Anthony, for instance, I mean, do you think it's more likely that they brought him in at the beginning of the season because Daryl Morey and his analytics staff thought he would be a good player this year, or just because he's buddies with Chris Paul and they just paid Chris Paul a lot of money and they want to do a favor to Chris Paul? I think the second one is much more likely. So I think you're right not to just throw Morey completely under the bus when we don't know what's going on in the background. However, the results, since it is a black box, those results coming out of the black box, not so great.
Well, so the example I made is, and I can't find it, but so this is an anecdote and it may be false. So I'll try and do more research into it. But I heard that Red Auerbach on the Celtics the owner once signed a player without asking Red Auerbach, and this is at the point that Red was established as one of the greatest ever because his wife, the owner's wife, liked the player. And we've seen lots of that where we don't know what constraints the general manager is given by the owner. And then as we've said about Carmelo Anthony, we don't know what constraints the star players give because there are lots of times where a savvy analytics squad could say, hey, look, the best player for this team, right? Say when LeBron James was going to the Miami Heat with Dwayne Wade, we say, you two are absolutely fantastic. The best player for you, by the way, is a more dominant center like Tyson Chandler. You don't really need Chris Bosh. Chris Bosh is kind of redundant at this point. And they might have said, we're not playing with Tyson Chandler. He's a scrub. Chris Bosh is a star. And then you basically are put in this very funny position. I've called it the Ray Allen principle because allegedly Kevin Garnett did not want to go to Boston until they had acquired Ray Allen, despite the fact that even without Ray Allen, Boston was an amazing destination with a healthy Paul Pierce and Rajon Rondo and a bunch of, in hindsight, it's obvious they weren't. But, at the time, there were some trade assets like Jeff Green looked like a good prospect. So, it looked like it would have been a reasonable destination. But he said, I'm not going until Ray Allen is there. So we don't know the constraints of star players, the constraints of the owner. And the funnier one. So I'll get this slight tangent in and try and get back to James Harden. Chandler Parsons, I think, is out for the season. I was reading. And I've seen some fun tweets about how much he's getting paid to not play in Memphis because I believe he signed a huge deal. We can go to Spotrac real quick.
And I have an update already on that. I read earlier today that he's been medically cleared to play since December 21st and has been scrimmaging with the team, but they just have not wanted to let him play.
Okay, so just as a clarification, Chandler Parsons is signed to a 4-year, $94 million deal. He is currently in the third year of it, so he's got at least another one coming and has played almost nothing. A rumor I've heard back in the day is Daryl Morey actually released him from his contract with the Rockets, even though he was a second-round pick, and Daryl Morey had his restricted free agency rights and could have picked him up for very cheap. But he released him allegedly because Chandler Parsons and Dwight Howard shared an agent, and the agent said, I'm not even going to have Dwight Howard consider you if you don't let Chandler Parsons out. And we've heard rumors like this. And I think Paul Shirley and Justin Halpern on the now canceled Short Corner podcast had mentioned that before, where they're behind the scenes dealings with agents. Agents are much more powerful. I think the NBA loves this narrative of mafia boss LeBron James controlling everything. Because it's a lot of fun, and it's, even if it were true, it's kind of bullshit. I think not Kevin Garnett, I always confuse the Kevins. Kevin Durant in an interview said, no one wants to say it, but LeBron James runs everything. That's not really true. But if you look at how agents, especially ones with ties to the NCAA, how much control they have in the NBA, it's kind of ridiculous. I believe, do you know the name of the one that's a big deal in the Los Angeles Lakers organization now?
Oh, who's working for the Lakers? Yeah, Rob Pelinka. Right, he played for Michigan on the Fab 4 team, or the Fab 5, whatever they were. Oh, it looks like we've lost Dre on Skype, but we're reconnecting. Let's see if we got him back. Are you back, Dre?
I am back. So what were you
Okay,
saying?
good, yes. So yeah, the Lakers executive I believe you're talking about is Rob Pelinka. He played for the Michigan Fab 5 team and then later became an agent.
Yeah, so agents wield a lot of sway. So we don't know how much control goes into all of these different moving pieces, but it does get very frustrating to see teams give up on him. And I did just want to make the note on Chandler Parsons that when I do see people saying, oh, he's ripping off the Memphis Grizzlies, what amazes me, again, with the narratives that aren't true is the Memphis Grizzlies are owned by a billionaire owner who is getting tax subsidies from Memphis to play there. I can't imagine why they would want to play in Memphis above other places. And allegedly,
shots fired.
and allegedly has an advanced analytics squad. John Hollinger has been or was working there for a while as analytics. They're the power. They're the what's the Goliath. They're the favorite here. They did not get outsmarted by an NBA player. They offered $100 million to an NBA player with an injury history, and there is no NBA player that would say no to that. So It does make me laugh when people are like, Chandler Parsons outsmarted the Memphis Grizzlies or he's ripping them off. It's like, why are you feeling sorry for a billionaire with a bunch of resources that made a bad decision, that looked like a bad decision at the time? Because I believe Chandler Parsons' production had degraded on Dallas, right? I don't think he was a bad signing by Dallas, but then he got injured early, did not look like himself, and then hasn't been healthy since. So it's like I have very little sympathy for Memphis not getting full production out of Chandler Parsons. I even tweeted about it. I said, he played 4 years for free at Florida, and it's marginally for free, right? Anybody who's like, well, he got a scholarship. It's like that scholarship is maybe worth a couple $100,000, and he's worth over $1 million a year in the NBA. So bullshit, you're going to convince me that was really a fair trade-off. I've seen that argument a couple times. They're not getting paid for free about college athletes is a classic one. And the counter I'll give you is it would be like if I had you do some work for me and gave you $1 and said, I didn't make you work for free. I gave you $1, so it's not free, right? That's essentially what's happening there. So I don't feel bad in the slightest about the Memphis Grizzlies. And I say that we always say this. Andrew Sutton brought it up first. I don't know if it's definitely not his phrase, but he's the first one who brought it up on the show about NBA players. Get your money. Like I will never side with an owner above a player. If an owner with millions to billions of dollars of resources at their hand, with advanced analytics at their hand, offers a player millions of dollars, it is not on the player to say no.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we want to talk this Michael Carter-Williams trade at all? I was a little confused by it, and I know, you know stuff better than me, so maybe I could ask you about it here.
So yeah, why don't you refresh what happened for me?
So Michael Carter-Williams got traded. Let's look at this treat. Yeah, but good pronunciations today.
It's tweet.
Tweet from Adrian Wojnarowski. Let's bring this up here. He has got a lot of tweets. Okay, I won't try to search through them. But basically, Houston, the narrative around this trade is Houston is worried about their salary cap. So they traded Michael Carter-Williams, who they signed off the street earlier this year, to Chicago, who's going to cut Michael Carter-Williams. So he doesn't really matter at all. But Chicago is sending a second-round draft pick to Houston, and then Houston is also sending cash to Chicago. However, Houston is also getting salary cap relief. So from Chicago's perspective, this looks to me a lot like Jordan Bell. they're just giving up a second-round pick for cash, and they got criticized that before, rightfully so, I guess. But then Houston, I guess it's just they're getting more salary cap relief than the cash they're sending to Chicago. That's as far as I got trying to figure this trade out.
Yeah, I don't know at all. I mean, it's a shuffling deck chairs trade as far as I can tell, and again, just a weird why even bother. You know, the same thing kind of happened with the Denver Nuggets where they picked up Nick Young and they spent $1 million, and why even it's annoying where these ticky-tack moves in the small, it's like the penny wise pound foolish. My cat has a lot to say on this. So one second.
Cat loves Michael Carter Williams.
Cat loves Michael Carter Williams. Okay, so I get to be a supervillain. So my cat's not meowing too loud on the show. But anyway, what essentially happens is they make these small moves, and on its own, it's not a bad move, but you make enough of those. And I think Patrick back in the day was talking to Minnesota Timberwolves, who we're going to talk in a minute, and how what they were called was contracts because David Kahn was the owner. And he would sign these $6 million, but this was back when the cap, was more, $10 million was closer to max. He would sign these players to $6 million deals, and you do enough of those, and then you're out of cap space, and you're out of good players, and you're out of roster spots, and you're screwed. And so Michael Carter Williams is kind of like that. So, I mean, it's probably best that they cut the cord, but it would have just been better if they'd never even bothered in the first place. By the way, random shout out that I did not realize. And I apologize profusely for this with how much we talk about him. I really should have known this history better. Sam Hinkie was part of the Houston Rockets organization when they made the James Harden trade. And I guess part of his pitch to the Philadelphia 76ers to run their organization was a PowerPoint presentation laying out the logistics of the James Harden trade. So I didn't realize he was part of that trade, which just definitely adds to his resume. I mean, I think with Sam Hinkie, as we've noted, it's very Klay Thompson-esque, where analyzing him as a GM, he is fantastic at the draft, fantastic at trades, but was just never, in the time we got to see him, great at free agent acquisitions. But the resume of some of the trades he has made with that included on it is just remarkable.
Yeah, and this is something I say from time to time, but yeah, I think the NBA GM role nowadays is better for someone like Rob Pelinka, although they've got, Magic in there now. I don't know exactly how that works, or the Warriors are the same thing, right? Bob Myers, an ex-agent. You just want someone that's really good at relationships, and especially with those super powerful agents, like you were saying, Dre, and so that can make things happen. And instead of figuring out what the best trade is, I think the GM's role is to open up avenues for all these trades, and that some GMs are definitely better than others. And then, of course, you need someone else in the organization, like a Sam Hinkie, that can understand, what trades you should actually make. So I think those are two different skills, and you need to have both of them, or people that have both of them.
I think I've read this quote before. I'm going to see if I can get it up in front, but I do find it very interesting that in the annals of kind of the Moneyball advanced analytics story, two people, Sam Hinkie and Paul DePodesta. And for those that don't know, Paul DePodesta was is it O or But anyway,
DePodesta, yeah, he was Billy Bean's right-hand man in the A's, and he also was with the Dodgers.
Yeah,
as their head for a long time.
Then he got signed as a GM in his own right, and then did not have success. Billy Bean, of course, has stayed with the A's forever, and the difference, as you're noting, is Billy Bean is very, savvy, gets along with a lot of people and all that, and Paul is the numbers guy, and then, of course, Sam Hinkie is the number guy. So an irony we can give is that the 76ers, the mistake they made was putting Sam Hinkie in that position. And you've even said yourself, if you, for whatever reason, Jeannie grants a wish and you get an NBA team, even if you would reach out to your friends, myself, Patrick, Arturo, and put us in the front office, you've said you wouldn't make us the GM. And
you'd be like team president, I think, Dre, the GM's boss.
But I would even say, I agree with you, where I'd go, I don't want to spend my time on the phone smoozing with people.
Yeah.
I just want to give a list of players to someone and say, go after these people in this order, and whatever you need to do, get it done. And so anyway, but what I was going to say about Paul DePodesta is I love this quote, as he said, and I'll tell you what I don't want. If you ever take your kids to an amusement park at Disneyland or whatever, they beg you to go on the Big Daddy roller coaster. They beg you, you say, are you sure? They say, absolutely, I want to go on this thing. So if you wait in line for 45 minutes, it takes up a good chunk of your day, and you finally get to the front of the line, they eyeball it and say, I'm not going to get on that thing. Not at all. And that's what happens to a lot of owners. They would say, hey, we want Moneyball. We want this disciplined approach to what we're doing. But then when it comes time to make the hard decisions, they say, I don't want any part of that. So I do think just what's interesting in the Sam Hinkie, Paul DePodesta line is that's essentially what happens. You get a GM in that says, I've got this. They say, I want that. And that is the most perfect metaphor I've ever heard to describe this, which is it's like waiting in line with a kid that freaks out. Or do you remember this, Brian? I don't know if they're too safe now for this now. Probably the right thing to do. But back in the day, swimming pools that would have like the high board, right? Like 10 feet.
The high dive, yeah.
Which I think they've gotten rid of for the most part because it probably
no.
is. I don't know. It's funny where there are things that I think the old generations, like kids these days, are soft. Like, maybe not injuring our youth is not a bad thing. Maybe not giving them brain damage because maybe you get CTE at a young age, jumping off a high board and you vote for Trump. Maybe that explains something. Who knows? But anyway, that kind of thing, right? You wait in line to get on the high dive, you start climbing up, and then you chicken out and you come down. I've never done it, but I mean, of course, that's a very, very common one. So that seems to happen in analytics. Other random shout out just related to the Houston Rockets. Steve Kerr took a shot at James Harden because someone asked, is James Harden changing the way that basketball is played? And he says, well, he is changing the way fouls are drawn. And I will say, when you look at players that take as many shots as James Harden, he is actually ridiculously good at free throw rate. And I would say more kind of importantly, really, really good at making them. Because I actually started looking this up. If you look for players that have seasons where they shot like over 15 shots, and so free throw rate, by the way, means number of free throws a player attempts compared to the number of shooting attempts they have. So James Harden, his highest he got was 59.2%, and that was in 2013. But one of the things that separates him from players like bigs such as Moses Malone, Charles Barkley, and actually Dwight Howard is up there, is James Harden is ridiculously good at making his threes. Another player, by the way, that's really good at this, which is interesting, is Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant has a really high free throw rate as well with a really good percentage. And actually, he didn't cross my mind when I looked this up. Yeah, I guess he's dropped since he's gone to Golden State. But when Kevin Durant was, for instance, on Oklahoma City, he did have some seasons where he was similar to James Harden. But James Harden, as a career player, has above a 50% free throw rate which just means, again, over 50% of the shots he takes also result in a free throw, which is just a ridiculous number. One of the things that I'll put as amusing in this, though, is I always compare the NBA to baseball in regards to Moneyball, Moriball, et cetera, is in Moneyball, one of the big breakthroughs was walks are important. And the best analog I can think of in basketball to baseball for a walk is getting to the free throw line. It is one of the easiest shots. Even the worst players, unless you're like Andre Drummond a few years ago or DeAndre Jordan, it is a plus EV move for you to make it to the free throw line. James Harden is remarkably good at making it to the free throw line, and it has always been part of the game. So it's odd that in baseball it was met with open arms. We should be doing this. And in basketball it's met with derision. Of course, they added anti-flopping rules. And one other note I'll make, just to Steve Kerr's point, is Basketball Reference, if you go to the seasons tab at the top, there is a league averages thing you can go to, and you can examine the free throw to field goal attempt percent. And so in the NBA this season, for instance, it is 200, which means 1 in 5 times, right? Every 5 field goal attempts, there is a free throw attempt, basically. If you go back in time to say Steve Kerr, the best season, right, 1996 with the Bulls, it was at 24.3% or 243. So the NBA has actually gotten harder in regards to free throws they give up to shot attempts as it was in the past. So it's another interesting anecdote where the derision James Harden is being met with should actually go the other way. And another teammate I'll shout out because it's going to be Oklahoma City Fever Day, Brian. I noted that when Russell Westbrook averaged that triple-double for a season, and you compared it to Oscar Robertson, the real amazing part was Russell Westbrook was I think 6 or 7 minutes fewer a game, excuse me, and the pace of the NBA had gone down as well, which was a huge difference. And so when you're looking at what James Harden is doing in terms of free throw attempts compared to what the NBA used to be, it's even more impressive.
Yeah, so no, I'm with you on that. I agree with you on the plus EV side of it for sure, and how it, and the visuals of it, right? Like, people hate watching Harden flop, and maybe the beard is part of it. I don't know. They don't like him seeing him stick his beard in there. It's viscerally disappointing to them. Just the same thing as walks. So I can get with you on that. I would say, though, that in terms of the numbers side of it, though, free throws people do tend to value, but rebounds are the ones to me that get ignored right now. Big men tend to get ignored. And just briefly on DePodesta, I'm not saying that anything you said is wrong there, because I haven't really studied the history of his demise at the Dodgers, but I will just kind of open the door a little bit to that the movie for Moneyball was different from the book. And here's what I mean by this. DePodesta asked to be taken out of the movie, right? There is no Paul DePodesta character in the movie, even though pretty much...
What's most frustrating to me, I love Jonah Hill's performance in the movie.
Yeah.
When it was supposed to be DePodesta, it was supposed to be played by Dimitri Martin, and I would have loved that. I love Dimitri Martin. So I'm extra angry at Paul, even though I respect his decision. I wanted to see Dimitri Martin in that rotation.
And that's fair. I think Dimitri Martin would have been good, but the point is they both are the nerdy guys, right? And they would have been that contrast like you were talking about, more like Sam Hinkie. But I think DePodesta in real life is more like Billy Beane. He's the tall, super good-looking guy who maybe isn't as much of a nerd. So I don't know. We'll see. That's all.
All right. Well, wow. We are burning through topics, but taking up a lot of time as well. I'm going to just make this quick, and unless you want to chime in more. Tony Dungy made a tweet that I was seeing getting a lot of derision, and this just kind of bugs me. So Tony Dungy, former coach, I believe, of the Colts, right? Did he did get a title, right, with Peyton Manning, or am I mistaken?
Yeah, he either got one or they lost in the Super Bowl, but yeah, they had some really good teams for sure. And he coached, I want to say, the Buccaneers as well briefly, or maybe for a while. So he had a long coaching career.
He's been an analyst. I think he's got one of the rants we like. I can't recall.
He was a player too. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. He played on defense, maybe even for the Pittsburgh Steelers Steel Curtain teams, I want to say. But anyway.
1990, and I don't know. I've got Wikipedia up, so I'm not even going to pretend. But a very short career, which is probably for the best. But yeah, and actually, I guess it was two times. He did get 2 Super Bowl rings. So anyway, all I was going to say is he made a tweet that's something like, when a team gets over a player with over 100 rushing yards, they win X percent of the time. But when they get a quarterback with over X passing yards, they only win Y percent of the time. I bet a bunch of owners don't know this. And I saw a bunch of derision, correlation versus causation, and him not understanding stats and da-da-da-da. And what interested me about that, and has always kind of irked me, is I see lots of people mess up the stats routinely. I've called this the Get Off Our Lawn podcast a lot in terms of basketball statistics, because I see so many variants of a stat that goes like this. The Nuggets, when they have Gary Harris and Paul Millsap on the floor, are plus 110. But when they have Gary Harris and Mason Plumlee on the floor, they're 98.3. Who do you think's more valuable, or whatever? And then someone like you, Brian, because I don't investigate that as much as I used to, because I'm sick of it, but you'll bring it to my attention, but then you'll actually do the research. You'll say, I looked it up, and those two lineups are on the court 91 minutes, had been on the court 91 minutes, and the other one's been on the court 47 minutes. And so the real answer is that doesn't mean a damn thing. I see so many people make simple mistakes with statistics, and I'll even include myself, because when I'm on Twitter and I make a tweet sometimes, it just means I'm looking at Basketball Reference. And I've had people sometimes where I'll make a quick tweet about, oh my God, this championship team did this. And someone will say, well, what about this and this and this? And I'm like, I wasn't presenting a term paper to you. I was just making an observation. But I'm saying lots of people, even people like myself that I think are decent at the stats, make simple mistakes that I get irked when I see the derision and high-mindedness of people about how much they know numbers, when I know a majority of them make simple mistakes every day. So I guess I did want to just throw that out there as one of those pet peeve things to me. I'm not even saying that they're wrong about Tony Dungy. I'm just saying it shocks me the number of people that act like they're an expert about stats because essentially they know a website to read numbers off of, when I know that they couldn't do the underlying math or even understand why the underlying math to some of the stats they use is wrong.
Yeah. Well, and even there's other problems too, right? Like we were talking about Paul George being played out of position earlier in the show. We were, if I remember this right, correct me if I'm wrong, Dre, we were getting a bad position from Yahoo on our site for a while. So we were like arguing with fans for a month about what, Paul George's actual position was. And I think it turned out we were wrong, right? That he was actually playing small forward again. But the point is, yeah, it's really hard to be precise all the time. But you should still try to do it.
Yeah. And not be, and that's another thing. One of my favorite mistakes we've made back in the day, I'm forgetting a bunch of names, but there was a football player that was saying, and how am I dropping the best runner ever?
Eric Dickerson.
No,
Barry Sanders.
Usain Bolt. Sorry, not the football player.
Oh, Usain Bolt. Yeah, he's fast.
He was saying that he thought he could beat him in a 40 at the combine or something. And Dave Barry did what we thought was a very simple bit of logic. You take Usain Bolt's normal time, you divide it by whatever to make it to the same distance. You compare it and you go, oh, that's ridiculous. And then what people who are actually runners noted, they said, well, it's not a linear equation, right?
Yeah.
The real way you look at a runner's equation doing a sprint is it's actually parabolic, right? They have to speed up and then they can't sustain their top speed. So they sustain it for as long as they can. And then they basically kind of drift down.
And every distance is a little bit different, right? You go 50 yards, 100 yards, 200 or 400. It's slightly different ability to be able to do that over that period of time.
And I don't even know that well. I'm just saying, but the point being, Dave and I have spent a lot of time studying some sports, and myself in particular, basically basketball. So we very quickly went, oops, we didn't know what we were talking about. And you're right. And so the same thing, when I see people that see a quick stat and they respond quickly as if they're an expert, and I go, I doubt you've put the work in to know that they are super wrong or to act as much of an expert as you are. What I would have done in that case, and I've done this before, is if I saw that tweet by Tony Dungy and didn't believe it, I would have just asked Brian Burke of Pro Football, Advanced Football Stats, right, or whatever, Advanced NFL Stats, whatever. It was purchased by ESPN.
Yep.
I've asked him because he's done that before, and I've done that a few times. The Packers, Mike McCarthy, basically, Brian Burke has said has made some questionable calls that have probably.
And he paid the price.
Oh, did he? I mean, he got paid.
He got fired.
He got paid. Well, he got fired this season, but what pisses me off is he's made millions of dollars, out here. He's in a bunch of commercials. He's had a huge career. He's probably going to get hired by at least one more NFL team. When people are like, this coach was fired for being stupid. I'm like, well, if you get to be stupid years in and years out and even have free analysis on the internet about what you can do to be better, I don't really know if you paid the price, right? It's very much like white collar crime, where someone's like, they embezzled billions of dollars, or more likely millions of dollars, and they're like, and they get sent to minimum security prison for 3 years and get a very small.
You had the best NBA one maybe ever, Dre, earlier in the show. Donald Sterling being forced to sell his team for the penalty of, what was it, 1.5 billion or something like that?
It was close to 2 if I know.
2 billion? Okay.
So if he'd known legalized gambling was coming, maybe he would have held on a little higher.
He did have to split it with his wife, though, I think, but still.
Well, whatever. Okay, speaking of firings, what's funny, Brian, I think if I had an editor or more time, I could just go back in time to all of the other coach firings and play similar sentiments. Coach and team president Tom Thibodeau was fired by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Good riddance. The only real question is what took him so long, and the fact that it happened after they got rid of Jimmy Butler is kind of shocking. The Timberwolves are just a mess of a franchise. It's one of those weird things, and I will use this to talk about Jimmy Butler after you get your thoughts in, but it is just one of those. This team has won in spite of itself, not because of anything good it's done. I just want to give a reminder to people that don't know this about Minnesota Timberwolves history, because I think it's huge. Back in the day, the Minnesota Timberwolves had Kevin Garnett, basically a 1-1A player with Tim Duncan, until Tim Duncan had that amazing finish to his career, right? Tim Duncan was playing up against LeBron James in the NBA Finals in his late 30s, which is remarkable. If Tim Duncan didn't have that postscript to his career, you could easily make the argument that Kevin Garnett had a better NBA career than Tim Duncan at some point, barring the postseason success. So the Timberwolves have Kevin Garnett, one of the best players in the NBA. We think MVP caliber player, very much like Rudy Gobert would have gotten our MVP vote several years in a row. They do an under the deal table with Joe Smith, who is one of the worst. Now it's funny that this distinction is getting watered down by some of like the Anthony Bennett's and other worse number one picks that
he's shooting 47% in the G League. Dre, watch out.
Okay. Oh, he's in the G League. Congrats,
Anthony Bennett. Yeah.
I hope he makes a comeback, honestly. But anyway, so Joe Smith, one of the worst at that time number one picks in NBA history. They do an under the deal table with him that they put in writing so that they can free up cap space to sign other players. The NBA finds out about it because they put it in writing, idiots, and strip them of draft picks. So basically they lose cap space, they lose draft picks, and waste several years of Kevin Garnett's prime. That's this team. So anyway, the fact that team is acting dysfunctional is nothing new or surprising. I will say the interesting point about Thibodeau from another aspect is obviously what ended up happening that we kind of have been able to infer from watching things is that Jimmy Butler was getting in fights with Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. We think one of those is right, whatever. And he possibly is getting in fights with players on the 76ers. But the tweet I made about that today is I was like, let's just be patient. He's suited up for 21 games. They're 15-6 in those games. I would wait before we overreact. But I think Jimmy Butler, when he was fighting Karl Anthony Towns, we don't give a damn if he's fighting with Andrew Wiggins. But if he's fighting with Karl Anthony Towns, and Karl Anthony Towns is a star, and to win in the NBA, you really do need two stars, which would be Jimmy Butler and Karl Anthony Towns. Thibodeau really, as far as we can infer, sided with Jimmy Butler and kind of derided Karl Anthony Towns. We've talked in the past how we think coaches like Phil Jackson, one of their skills, and George Karl, by the way, was to balance egos, because it's really hard in an NBA squad when you have a lot of egos. When you have Kenyon Martin, Carmelo Anthony, and Allen Iverson on the same squad, or Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal on the same squad together, and Michael Jordan was no picnic, it's hard to balance those egos. Having Thibodeau, who just sided with Butler, was definitely the wrong maneuver on the team. So actually, this is a case where we think getting rid of Thibodeau was probably the right move, but they waited 4 or 5 months too late. And we really think they should have tried to, get a better coach and fix the Butler Karl Anthony Towns feud instead.
Yeah, and this kind of takes me back to the bad days of the Warriors back to 1993. When they traded up to get Chris Webber, right? They traded 4 draft picks to move up 2 spots. Got Chris Webber. They had a good rookie season. Got to the playoffs. Did pretty well. But then their coach at the time, Don Nelson, got in this big fight with Chris Webber. Don Nelson was one of those old school guys. And so they're like, oh, what do we do? Same situation, right? And the same thing happened. They traded Chris Webber away. But then a little while later, they're like, I guess we're going to fire Don Nelson too. But then they brought him back, a decade later. So things go in cycles in the NBA. And, Thibodeau is known for being an innovator on defense. If you ever watch Coach Nick, he loves icing the pick and roll. Thibodeau did that. I think he did some of the switching stuff. But, that was years ago. The league's catching up. And, nothing stays secret for long. So even if he's good at X's and O's, or was at one time, if you can't manage if you can't get along with your top player Towns, then there's no place for you on the team, unfortunately. Your top players are what matter first before the coach. It just has to be that way nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting where there are a couple of coaches, and by the way, the demise of the Spurs maybe was overrated because they're doing really well, although they're up there with the Memphis. I didn't even put them on the script, Brian, although I know we already brought them up a little earlier. They're up there with the Memphis Grizzlies where they don't really have a legitimate star that makes me believe they're a contender, but they're
good on defense.
They're good. Is it the same thing? Is that the same trick?
Let's go back to Basketball Reference here.
They're good on offense. 7th on offense, 16th on defense.
Oh, I was dead wrong. Oh, so you're talking about the Spurs or the Grizzlies?
The Spurs this season, and then the Grizzlies are the alternate. The Grizzlies make a little more sense to us, where
they're sixth on defense, right?
They're playing amazing defense this season, and actually that's slowing down a little, if I recall. The Spurs basically are shooting really good from three. They're just they're making their shots, which I guess.
So is that why Popovich is complaining about threes so much this season? Because he actually has to watch his team take a lot of them for once? Is it the first time they're doing it?
They're 28th in attempts, but number one in percentage.
Oh wow!
But I don't think the Grizzlies or the Spurs are built for the playoffs. So we'll see. And for what it's worth, both the Grizzlies and Spurs are, currently the Grizzlies are out of the playoffs again, and the Spurs are a number 6 seed. They'd be lined up to play the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I just don't believe, especially if Robertson comes back, I don't believe that if they're playing Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Steve Adams, 40-plus minutes a game, that the Spurs can keep up. So we'll just have.
And I've been bad-mouthing the Spurs all season, and I still don't really see them as a playoff team. It's possible, right? If LeBron stays hurt and the Lakers keep getting crappy, if the Utah Jazz can't figure it out, then sure, maybe they can climb in. But yeah, I'm not confident they're even going to make the playoffs. I'm not a big Spurs fan, unfortunately.
What I would really love to have happen this season, Brian, I think it's a really low shot. I would love the 4 California teams to make it. That would be amazing, and it would be the first time ever. Like, I don't even know the counts, because obviously Golden State and the Clippers have been bad for so long in their histories, although they recently had some success, that it just doesn't happen. But having the Kings, the Lakers, the Warriors, and how did I drop the last one? Kings,
Lakers, Clippers, Kings, Warriors. Yeah, 2 NorCal, 2 SoCal. That would be cool. The Kings have been okay. I've been watching them a bit this season. They're not bad, so it's possible.
Darren Fox, man. He's
there you go.
Or Junior of the Year. We managed to get through all of our topics, Brian. So I do have one shout out if you have any. But yeah, if you have anything else to wrap up on, any shout outs, we'll actually get through the show.
No shout outs. I guess, yeah, well, okay, I'll say this one. The same time every year, right? GDQ is running again, the speed running marathon. They start on Sunday. They'll be running all week. They are raising money to fight cancer on their streaming marathon.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, we're a big fan of speed runs and stuff around here.
Yeah, check it out on Twitch.
All right, the one, I'll try and put this on the script, Brian, at the very bottom, just so you can find it if you want it. I want to give a shout out to Arturo Galletti, a.k.a. America Numbers, who made what I think may turn into, a meme template that I really love. I haven't watched the full interview. I've seen lots of clips where...
Wait, Arturo made this template?
I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
Immediately after he said it, I said, "Are you the first one that you know of that has used this template?" And he says, as far as he knows, yes. So bug him if someone beat him to it, but this template is beautiful. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is just amazing. I'm so glad she's in the Senate. I have lots of thoughts.
She's in the House, actually, not the Senate.
House, right. She can't make the Senate, right? She's too young.
I think she's you have to be
29.
You can do it at 28 because Biden was in the Senate 28. You just can't run for president until...
I thought it was 30. Better
I'm not sure.
Okay. Anyway. But yeah,
watch out in 2024, though.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But she had an interview with Anderson Cooper that has, had a lot of good clips, that hasn't painted Anderson Cooper in a good light, and she has just nailed it. And there is a point in the interview where he asks her if she thinks Trump is a racist, and she says, yeah, no question. And then Anderson Cooper, with the most startling comeback, especially as others have noted, he's had op-eds where he's called Trump a racist. Says, how can you say that? Some are arguing that, he was just trying to get her to expand and he wasn't really being confrontational. Didn't come off that way is all I can say. But Arturo made a template using that. And the one he started it with is he says, do you believe Kobe is better than MJ? And then he has AOC on Twitter say, yeah, no question. And then Anderson Cooper say, how can you say it? I love this template. It's a fun one, and I think it might take off. It might be one of those things in a couple of years you see. So got to give credit for making that. It was a lot of fun. And then, of course, I'll give Cortez the nod, too. She has been amazing. What I found fascinating, and I'm going to call this the Tim Donaghy method.
Okay.
So hear me out. I've seen some people, including some liberal people that I like, be critical of her, and I'm not strictly against that, except that I'm noticing what they are doing, in my opinion, is holding her to a higher standard than they would hold others. I haven't seen them talk about their own representatives or even people like Bernie Sanders who would have, I've heard some people argue the same issues, right? They would say things and you would say, well, they don't understand the logistics as well, or don't understand the specifics as well as we would want. And the way Tim Donaghy, who is, if you don't know, was a referee who was embroiled in a scandal because he got involved with the mob and was fixing NBA games. The trick, and there's a great book, I believe it's called Gaming the Game, if I'm not mistaken. I might include in the show notes, I might not. But what they found out he was doing is he was calling the games fair in the sense that every call he made was correct. But he basically would just hold one team, the team that he wanted to lose or win, whatever, to a different standard than the other. He would call a foul on one team against Kevin Durant if he wanted the Warriors to win, or if he wanted like the Rockets to win, he would call a foul against James Harden. That was his trick. He would be fair, but he wouldn't be the same. And I've noticed this is a very common thing to look out for. If you see someone saying, you know, I like what Cortez is saying, but I just don't believe that she has the blah, blah, blah to do this. And I know one person that she's compared herself a lot to is Paul Ryan. And she's going, you guys called Paul Ryan a rising wunderkind for the Republican Party. And he had just as many, if not more, definitely more, right? His financial policy is ridiculous, flaws than me. Why did you give him the benefit of the doubt and call him a wonder kid and then say I'm inexperienced in it ever? So I'm just saying I've noticed that, and I'm not even saying your criticisms of her are wrong, but I'm saying question yourself if you notice yourself being critical on her but they're giving a pass to others, which is a very common thing to have happen.
Yeah, I could talk about this for hours. I'll try to be brief, though. So one thing that's going on is this just seems all really good for her personally, if you're just in terms of political brands, right? To get nerdy for a second. Her, it's like Streisand effect, or reverse Streisand effect. I don't know how you'd say it. So like the right to put out, they dug up this like spoof dancing video of her from college, right? And put it out to show, because I don't know, Republicans hate dancing. They're like all Jerry Orbach and Dirty Dancing in the 80s, right? But of course it got like 19 million views and was a big thing for her, right? So she's just going to eat all this up. This is going to be great for her. But yeah, but in terms of what you said about, you know, holding to her to a standard, yeah, it is kind of ridiculous. I think what people are talking about right now is she misstated some statistics and then gave this answer, of which part of it, out of context, was something to the effect of, well, it's okay if you don't get the details right if your heart is in the right place and you're fighting for the right thing. But in context, it's not what she's saying. She's not really saying the details don't matter. So I think there's been a lot of spin unfairly against her on this, for one thing. So yeah, she's great, and she's just going to keep ascending, I think. And I noticed one thing about this meme that Arturo threw in. He said Anderson Vanderbilt. I think everyone knows this, but maybe they don't. Anderson Cooper really is a direct heir of the Vanderbilt, fortune. And that's something that's going on in the media today, is that a lot of our biggest American media stars are elites. They really are, and are from elite families like Anderson Cooper. So Arturo is, right if he wants to get a nice socialist dig in there in this tweet. So anyway, it was a very good tweet. Oh yeah, and I'll say we'll table it for later because we could talk more. And basically, if there's a week of boringness, I'm not going to lie. So after Nurkic's amazing game, right, the 5x5, 2020, et cetera, right, I joked to Jay Brett in the comments. I said, obviously that's on the list. It's not going to come off unless something amazing happens this week, like multiple quadruple doubles and someone beating Kobe's record. Or, I kind of, Kobe's 81-point game, I do kind of consider a record because Wilt Chamberlain is from such a different era and all that. So I let Kobe's 81 stand, and was an amazing game. And then the games were kind of weak because I said in the same discussion with Jay Brett, I was like, Nurkic is going to stay for sure. I doubt Jokic is going to hold. And then Jokic held because it was kind of a meh week. So if there is a really boring week of basketball news, maybe you and I could just talk politics. I will actually say funny enough about Paul Ryan to the people that are getting very excited, which I'm not against. I'm on board. Keep the same thing in mind. The people going, oh my goodness, she's a star. Look for her on the presidential ballot in 2024 or whatever. Give pause that this happens every time there's, a new young face of a party and everybody's like, oh my goodness, they're going to take off. Yeah, how's Michael Avenatti doing right now? Although that's not a fair comparison, but I take your point.
All right. Well, that's all I got for my shout outs. You got yours. We've been the Boxscore Geeks show. My cat says bye too. If you find us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week, twitch.tv/nerd numbers, usually on Mondays, sometime around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find the podcast on the iTunes and Stitcher store, Boxscore Geeks, the Boxscore Geeks show, sorry. And if you missed the live show, you can catch recaps on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. Again, did I already say I was your host, Dre Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers? If not, you get to hear Nerd Numbers for the billionth time. And as always, you can find Brian on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. That's been our show, and we'll talk to you next time.